Songs he sounds later was a hit for us because it was number one on top, number one on Easy Listening, number one on R&B.
How do you stay together 8 years?
I tell you, it's no formula, but we have a little secret weapon we rap a lot.
Just talk it all out.
All the way around.
In the 70s and 80s, the Commodores were not just a band, they were a global music phenomenon. Their image on stage, with flowing afro hair and vibrant suits, became an unforgettable symbol. Lionel Richie, with his warm voice and captivating smile, alongside co-founders William King and Thomas McClary, created a legendary lineup that conquered the charts with unforgettable hits like Easy, Brick House, and 3 Times a Lady. However, behind the bright spotlight lies a completely untold story. Controversies, divisions, and personal tragedies gradually pushed them apart. Backstage altercations, unreplied reconciliation emails, and a funeral with one member missing their brothers. The sad endings, the broken pieces. Do you really know what happened to the Commodores? In today's video, join us as we uncover the dark chapters of a legendary band that lost its way. However, few know that behind the dazzling spotlight were controversies, divisions, and tragedies that pushed them to the brink of collapse. Backstage fights, unreplied reconciliation emails, and a funeral filled with tears of one member absent from their brothers. Do you know the sad endings of the pieces that made up the Commodores? Join us as we turn the pages of a legendary band's painful story in today's video. All of the Commodores' beautiful memories began during the days when everything was still pure. In 1968, under the scorching heat of a southern summer in the U.S., under the old oak trees leading to the gates of Tuskegee University in Alabama, a long line of first-year students gathered in the registration area. For most black students here, getting into college was a miracle. Among the crowd that day was Thomas McClary, 18 years old, carrying a folder and wearing a worn-out guitar on his back. The boy from Florida had never been on a big stage before, but in his mind, there was already one thought: start a band. His goal at that time was simple: to play music, impress a few girls, and maybe win the annual talent show. McClary didn't talk to anyone in line until a sound came from behind: a whistle. Strangely, it wasn't a popular tune, but a fragment from Eddie Harris's jazz piece, Freedom Jazz Dance. It was something only true music lovers could recognize. He turned around and met the eyes of a shy guy wearing glasses. McClary asked, "Are you a musician?" The boy answered softly, "Not exactly. I just play a little." And that boy was Lionel Richie, who would later become a global music legend. A few days later, McClary visited Lionel's grandmother's house, a small brick home located on the edge of the university campus. As McClary stood by the window, peering through the thin curtain, he was struck by Lionel's musical ability. Inside, Lionel was singing the first lines of "A Change Is Gonna Come," pouring his soul into the song. McClary stood frozen by the door, never having heard anyone sing like that. In that moment, all he could think was, "This is the person I need." Shortly after that fateful meeting, Lionel Richie and Thomas McClary, along with a few friends from the dorm, formed a small band called the Mystics. They had no experience performing, no knowledge of music arrangements, just a burning passion and a few old instruments. In those rushed nights of practice, they dreamed of stage lights, applause, and the attention of their fellow students. That dream became a reality when they unexpectedly won the school's talent show on September 28, 1968, at the large auditorium of Tuskegee University. However, the reality was not as easy as they had imagined. After their unexpected victory, they quickly realized they were lacking everything: professional instruments, a skilled drummer, and a solid band structure. At the same time, another group on campus, the Jays, was falling apart due to members graduating. McClary quickly proposed a merger between the two bands. The Mystics needed more people, and the Jays needed to continue. That's how Milan Williams, keyboard, Andre Callahan, drums, and Michael Gilbert, bass, joined the new lineup, alongside Richie, McClary, and William King, the trumpet player with a smile that never faded. They practiced tirelessly every night, as if Motown would come knocking the next day. And then, the moment came when they needed a name powerful enough for a band poised to break out of the walls of Tuskegee University. On the night of November 11, 1968, they sat around a scratched wooden table by the window in their dormitory lounge. William King, a lively trumpet player always full of jokes, spontaneously grabbed a thick dictionary from the bookshelf, opened it halfway, closed his eyes, and ran his finger down the page. His finger stopped on one word: Commodore. It was a naval rank, sounding dignified and strong, like a ship leading the way through a vast ocean. Then Richie glanced at the next page and burst out laughing. "You almost picked Commodes, huh?" "A toilet?" The laughter rang out, loud and clear. In that moment, they were not artists shaping their fame, nor people driven to conquer the music industry. They were simply 6 boys, barely 20, laughing so hard they were in tears from a silly game with a dictionary. But then, as the laughter faded in the dim light, no one objected to the name, the Commodores. The name, chosen randomly, turned out to be strangely perfect. None of them knew that this name would later appear on the cover of albums sold worldwide, be called out at award ceremonies, and eventually be read in courtrooms during a decades-long trademark dispute. But at that moment, the Commodores was just a name filled with dreams. They began performing at small events. Although they didn't have big stages or professional lighting, their music filled the air at student parties and small clubs around Tuskegee in 1968. Richie sang like he was born to be on stage, McClary played guitar with pure instinct, and Milan glided over the keyboard as if he'd never missed a beat. Gradually, people started to talk about a young black band with a funky sound that was unlike anything they'd heard before. Though they weren't famous yet, all of this planted the seeds for friendship, passion, and a beautiful beginning. No one could have guessed that it was here, in this very place, where the tragedy would eventually begin. After 3 years of touring around Alabama with unpaid gigs, with sweat on their collars and music echoing in the darkness, the Commodores finally did what any young band in that era dreamed of. They drove to New York. It was the spring of 1971. 6 young men left Tuskegee in an old truck, carrying guitars with chipped paint, a drum kit with loose screws, and hopes that were larger than the luggage they carried. They had no contract, no agent, and no plans other than one thing. They had to play music in New York. As they reached the toll booth on the New Jersey Turnpike, the car slowed down. The clock read 2 a.m. When they stopped in front of the barrier, they realized they didn't have enough, just $4.50, to pay for the toll. It was a simple yet cruel truth. Their dream of performing in New York might end right here, just because they were short of $5. The group sat in stunned silence, unsure what to do. Someone suggested they turn back to Alabama and wait until they could save enough to try again. No one wanted to speak it aloud, but the look in everyone's eyes showed the crushing disappointment. Their fate was being tested right from the start. At that moment, a middle-aged man stepped out of the truck behind them. He walked up to the toll booth, pulled out his wallet, handed over the exact $4.50, and simply said, "I was once as poor as you. Don't give up." He turned back to his vehicle without asking for thanks. For the Commodores, that gesture was more than just a simple act of kindness. It was the first sign that they deserved to keep chasing their dreams. The car continued on, more resolute now. After the long, exhausting drive from Alabama, the Commodores stopped at a YMCA in Harlem, a budget accommodation for low-income travelers. They could barely afford a small, musty room. With no space for their bulky instruments, they left all their gear in the car parked outside, locking it up and trusting everything would be fine overnight. But the next morning, when Andre Callahan went to check the car, he screamed so loudly that the whole group jumped up. "My drums! My stuff's all gone!" The group ran outside, only to be met with an empty scene. The car had been broken into, drums, guitar, amplifier, microphones, all gone. It was a moment of dead silence in the heart of Harlem, where their music dreams almost ended. All because of a single night's rest. There, sitting huddled on the sidewalk at the corner of 135th Street and Lenox Avenue in Harlem, with the chill of the morning air still lingering, Everything they had worked for over the past 3 years was gone in the blink of an eye. They had nothing left except for a single old harmonica that Lionel Richie had forgotten in his jacket pocket. Richie quietly took out the harmonica and played a short blues tune. The sound echoed between the footsteps of passers-by, carrying all the disappointment, exhaustion, and the fading faith that had been slowly eroded. And in that moment of seeming hopelessness, a stranger stopped. He stood there for a while, listening until the last note faded. His eyes, full of understanding, seemed as if he had seen moments like this many times before in his life. The man was Benny Ashburn, an Oakland-based advertising executive who just happened to be in Harlem that day. But what he saw wasn't a group of failed musicians sitting on the sidewalk. He saw a band still in formation, one with the potential to shake an entire generation. With just one simple question, Benny Ashburn changed their fate. "Do you guys want to perform?" Benny handed them $50 from his wallet with no strings attached. Thanks to him, they secured their first performance at Small's Paradise, a legendary nightclub that had hosted icons like James Brown. Despite having to borrow instruments and their hands still trembling from the shock of losing everything, they played with all they had left. That night, the audience stood and clapped nonstop. In the music, Benny stood in the back of the room, his arms folded, nodding like a man who had just made a winning bet on something once thought lost. That night, Benny Ashburn, their manager and mentor, saw their future clearly. He not only helped them regain their confidence, but quickly expanded their connections, arranging more performances at major clubs in New York, then Philadelphia, Chicago, and eventually heading west across the U.S. The sound of their energetic performances began to echo throughout the music industry. They were invited to open for the Jackson 5 on their national tour in 1971 to 1972, and that became their golden ticket. For the first time on big stages, they were no longer the unknown black band from Alabama. They made the audience move and remember their name. After the tour, in 1972, they signed with Motown Records, stepping into the legendary hall of soul and funk music. But the key difference was that the Commodores were not forced into the mold like many other groups under Motown's roof. Thanks to Benny's persistent negotiations and their own musical diversity, they retained full control over their songwriting and creative direction. This was a rare precedent in the music industry. In a private meeting at Motown's headquarters in Los Angeles, Berry Gordy, the founder of the label, told Benny Ashburn, "I don't need another copy of the Jackson 5. I need a group of men who play music as if they live for it." And that's exactly how they lived, through every note, every performance, and every hit that would later become legendary. From 1974 to 1977, the Commodores released a series of hits that solidified their fame. Machine Gun opened with the frenzied keyboard sound of Milan Williams, becoming a popular track in sports and film. Brick House, 1977, a rebellious funk anthem celebrating black women, took over dance floors. And Easy, the same year, turned Richie into the ballad soul of the group with his deeply resonant voice. By 1978, Three Times a Lady exploded globally. The song, written by Richie as a tribute to his parents on their wedding anniversary, touched millions of hearts across the U.S. and Europe. It reached number one in the UK, Australia, Ireland, and many other countries, marking their first international breakthrough. The song was so gentle that people forgot it came from a funk band, and that was the magic of the Commodores. They could be both fiery and tender, making you dance and making you cry. In a performance in New Orleans, after Lionel Richie had just finished singing Three Times a Lady, an older woman walked up to him backstage, took his hand, and said, "Your song made my husband say, 'I love you,' for the first time in 20 years. Richie smiled and thanked her, but as he turned away, a deep sadness clouded his gaze. His songs had brought him fame, but they were also slowly creating an invisible rift between him and the other members of the band. In 1978, the Commodores ventured into film with a performance of Too Hot to Trot in the disco movie Thank God It's Friday, becoming symbols of freedom and vitality for the black community. Their vibrant performance style, complete with flashy vests, afro hair, and platform shoes, made them stand out in the funk soul wave of the era. But beneath the stage lights, internal fractures quietly began to form. Lionel Richie, the centerpiece of every successful ballad, started to receive more attention as an individual. When his name was mentioned as the star of the group, while the Commodores seemed to fade into the background, a quiet unease spread within the band. The cracks were beginning to show. On the night of June 14, 1980, at the Auditorium Theater in Chicago, the Commodores had just finished one of their biggest performances of the tour. The audience was chanting, "Lionel, Lionel," as the band retreated to the wings. Backstage was buzzing, but the atmosphere among the group grew heavy. A journalist from a prominent music magazine entered, camera in hand, ready to take a photo. As usual, the group stood up to pose. But with a quick motion, Richie was asked to step aside, the lights set up specifically for him. The rest of the band was left out of the frame. Thomas McClary, adjusting his shirt, saw what was happening. He marched straight to the set, stood between Richie and the photographer, and pointed sharply at the photographer, his eyes unwavering. "This is a group photo. If it's just one person, put your camera away. Now." Despite McClary's frustration, the photo was taken with only Richie in the frame, a forced smile on his face. In 1980, the first signs of division within the Commodores became painfully evident. During a performance in Las Vegas, Lionel Richie's name appeared in large font, double the size of the Commodores, on the promotional poster. After the show, Ronald LaPred walked out to the lobby, stared at the poster for a long moment, then silently tore it down, crumpled it, and threw it in the trash. No one stopped him. No one said a word. But that silent action spoke volumes. The group was being pushed further and further into the background, piece by piece. Around the same time, Motown quietly began experimenting with Richie as a solo artist. He was asked to write songs for Diana Ross, Kenny Rogers, record demos on his own, and accept separate media invitations. Meanwhile, the other members of the Commodores began to feel increasingly excluded from the collective vision. McClary and King felt this shift the most. In 1982, Richie released his first solo album and hit global success with All Night Long in 1983. Yet, during all of this, he never made an official departure from the band. Everything happened in silence, leaving the band in limbo, unable to perform or release new music because promoters refused to book shows without Richie. Inevitably, a moment of reckoning came. In late December 1982, a small meeting room at Motown's headquarters in Los Angeles was set with 6 chairs around a long wooden table. Outside, light rain drizzled, and the atmosphere inside was heavy, as if everyone knew what was about to unfold. Lionel Richie arrived 30 minutes late, carrying a folder of his own, placing it next to the unfinished tour plans. After a brief pause, Richie began to announce that he would be temporarily stepping away from group activities. He stressed that this was a temporary step and that he would be back. A silence lingered for almost a minute before William King, who had kept his emotions tightly controlled until then, stood up, slammed his hand on the table. The tour schedule lay open in front of him, marked with red lines and countless postponed and not confirmed notes. King's face turned red, not from immediate anger, but from the countless shows that had been canceled, contracts rejected, all because people refused to book the Commodores without Richie. He slammed his hand down on the torn schedule in front of him, pointing directly at Richie. McClary quickly stood up, placing a hand on King's shoulder, trying to pull him back. Walter Orange remained seated, his eyes following every movement, as though afraid something might spiral out of control. Richie sat still, silent. He didn't look at King, didn't offer a word. On the table, a printed album cover of his solo work lay exposed, the name Lionel Richie boldly printed with no mention of the band. The suffocating silence in the room spoke louder than any words could. One man was moving on from the past, while the others were left in a state of endless waiting. The meeting ended with no official decision. But from that day forward, no one in the group asked Richie, "When are you coming back?" because the answer and the farewell had already been made long ago, though no one wanted to admit it. There was no official statement, no tears, no goodbye hugs. But in that room, a band, brotherhood, and a journey from the dorms of Alabama to the heights of Motown had quietly disintegrated. And like the saddest of goodbyes, it didn't start with conflict. It began when one person kept promising to return, yet had already walked away in their heart long before. After Lionel Richie left, the Commodores embarked on a turbulent journey, not only in music, but also within the very soul of each remaining member. In 1982, when Lionel Richie was no longer part of the group, Thomas McClary realized that the Commodores was no longer the place where he found passion and creativity. Despite previous disagreements with Richie, McClary stayed on, but the feeling of emptiness became more and more apparent. Music no longer inspired him as it once had, and eventually McClary decided to leave the band. This marked his official departure from the Commodores. In 1984, Skylar Jett was chosen as the replacement vocalist. He was young, talented, and full of enthusiasm. But Skylar was not Richie, and the audience knew that. On stage, the band still played together, but the invisible gaps continued to grow. Performances dwindled, and they no longer appeared on the charts as frequently as before. By the end of the 1980s, Sheldon Reynolds, a new guitarist, joined with the hope of rejuvenating the band's image. But shortly after, Reynolds left it all behind to join Earth, Wind & Fire. No words of anger, but his departure felt like another loose stitch on the already torn fabric. However, the first shock didn't come from the recording studio, but from a decision that was quietly yet firmly made. In 1990, when the group was invited to perform in South Africa during the height of apartheid, Milan Williams, the creator of the band's signature sound, declined. He declared, "I can't perform when people are banned from the venue because of the color of their skin." This decision didn't just lead to his departure from the group, it marked the end of the original lineup of the Commodores. Little did anyone know, this decision had been brewing for over 10 years, following a tragedy where Milan nearly lost his life. In October 1980, the Commodores were still reeling from their busy touring schedule after losing Lionel Richie. Without their lead vocalist, the band had to redefine itself in the studio, on stage, and in the hearts of their fans. In this context, Milan Williams, the quiet keyboardist who had been one of the foundational figures of the band's sound, continued his habit of turning to the sky whenever he needed to escape the pressure. Milan held a private pilot's license, and the single-engine propeller plane was one of the rare spaces where he could relieve his stress. However, on October 25, 1980, the sky was no longer a safe place. The plane carrying Milan and Representative Lester Mornay from Arizona to a performance suddenly experienced engine failure as they flew over Phoenix. Without any warning, they had no choice but to make an emergency landing in the middle of heavy traffic. The plane skimmed over cars, hit a median, slid for a long distance, and then caught fire. In that life-or-death moment, Milan and Mornay managed to escape just before the cockpit turned into a sea of flames. Fortunately, no one was killed. After narrowly escaping death, Milan realized how fragile the life of an artist truly was. The memories of the Commodores, from their early days at Tuskegee to sleepless rehearsals, were now just lost memories amidst the whirlwind of fame and conflict. After the crash, Milan gradually withdrew from the stage. He quietly faded away from the spotlight, as if that accident not only ended a flight, but also the faith he had carried throughout his musical journey. 2 years after the crash, Milan began to sense changes, not only in his spirit, but also in his body. Although he continued his music, he was no longer the same. In 2004, Milan was diagnosed with leukemia, a deadly disease that had silently attacked his body for years. During the 2 years he fought the disease, Milan shared nothing with anyone. He didn't want anyone to see him as weak. On July 9, 2006, Milan Williams passed away at MD Anderson Hospital in Houston, Texas. His funeral took place in the heavy, quiet atmosphere of Tuskegee, the very place where he and the Commodores had once started everything. The room was filled with sad music, but no one could remember the melody. Milan's cousin handed Thomas McClary the notebook Milan had kept throughout the last 2 years of his life, like a confession he never had the chance to voice. McClary opened the notebook, each fragile page like memories that had faded. When his eyes stopped on the hastily written words, time seemed to slow, and it was only him and the words Milan left behind. I didn't leave the band because of anger, but because of my own conscience. I missed the days at university when the Commodores was just a pure dream, when music was the only thing we needed and loved. McClary trembled as he held the notebook, his eyes red and swollen from tears that would not stop. Each word from Milan tore his heart apart. It was the painful truth he could never accept. The Commodores was no longer the band they had once dreamed of. It was no longer a friendship, no longer a shared journey. The happy years were now just memories, and when the stage lights dimmed, everything had cracked. Milan didn't leave because of anger, but because he realized the band was no longer a place where he could be true to himself. The pure dreams of youth had been replaced by fame, pressure, and competition. And those brothers, they were no longer the ones he had trusted completely. In that moment, McClary wasn't just grieving Milan's death, but also realizing that the band, once a source of pride, was now shattered and could never return to what it once was. That farewell wasn't just the departure of a member, it was the end of a memory, a dream they had once created together. Witnessing this heartbreaking truth, it was Thomas McClary, the co-founder and a close friend from their early days at Tuskegee, who longed for reconciliation more than anyone, despite having witnessed many departures and changes within the lineup. For many years, McClary silently sent letters, text messages, and made calls to the members, not to blame, but simply to hold on to something unfinished. To him, the Commodores wasn't a closed chapter, but a sentence still left hanging. In 2008, that hope was reignited when Richie unexpectedly invited McClary to perform together at a concert in New Zealand. The audience cheered as if no separation had ever happened. A year later, at the Essence Festival in New Orleans, they stood on stage together again, the spotlight temporarily erasing old cracks. 65,000 fans stood up, singing along to Easy, as if time itself had gone backward. But that hope didn't last long. After the performance, McClary proposed a special project to reunite the original lineup and perform one final show as a proper farewell to the past. At the beginning of 2009, Richie sent an email to all the members he could still contact. In it, he wrote briefly, "I want to make amends. Let's perform one last show, not for money, not for fame, but simply to close this chapter in the most beautiful way." 1 week after Richie's email, William King replied with just one line, "It's too late." No further words were needed, as that brief response encapsulated 40 years of unresolved wounds. For a long time, many members hadn't spoken to Richie for 40 years. For them, the gap between them and Richie wasn't just about time, it was the distortion of a brotherhood that once bound them, now replaced by silence, misunderstandings, and promises never fulfilled. For Richie, the reunion was an act of redemption. But for the others, it was a door that had long been closed. And behind that door wasn't the stage, nor the spotlight. It was the painful memories they had tried to bury for half their lives. When reconciliation was impossible, disputes began to arise. In 2013, Thomas McClary decided to reclaim the name The Commodores for his own band, despite no longer being an official member. This decision left William King and Walter Orange unable to remain silent. They sued McClary, claiming that the name of the band should belong to the members currently performing under it. The legal battle dragged on for 5 years, with a Florida court ruling in 2018 that only the remaining members of the group could claim ownership of the Commodores name. After the ruling was made, McClary did not stay silent. In a post from May 2018, he wrote, "I don't need that name to prove who I am." Beneath the post, many fans shared their feelings, with one writing, "Without you, Commodores has no soul." This statement not only reflected McClary's irreplaceable role in the group, but also the pain of the fans, who realized that the name, no matter who owned it, could never erase the memories of the Commodores as a passionate, pure, and powerful force in music. Since 1985, the Commodores began to shift with the song Night Shift, which won a Grammy and marked their transition to pop. However, this change was not easily accepted by their loyal fans, as the band abandoned their strong funk roots in pursuit of easier success. In 1987, J.D. Nicholas expressed concern about the group losing its musical soul, and William King lamented, "Without Motown, we have nothing." Nevertheless, the Commodores continued to survive in the changing music world, selling over 70 million albums and being honored at major music festivals. But their legacy is not just about these successes. It is also about the regret for a glorious era that has passed. Since 2010, although William King, Walter Clyde Orange, and J.D. Nicholas have continued to perform under the name The Commodores, the group's return no longer carries the same strength and unity as before. The Commodores today are no longer the passionate young men they once were, but rather experienced men bearing the weight of time and memories. Their performances no longer have the fiery energy they once did when the group stood strong at the height of funk and soul. The remaining performances are merely reminders of a bygone era, when the Commodores ruled the charts and built a musical legacy that no longer exists. Those powerful grooves now only echo in small performances. They still stand on stage, still offer their music, but it is clear that no one can deny that the Commodores are no longer the same. The group has lost a part of its soul, and that loss brings a sense of regret that cannot be erased.